My name is Ashton R. I'm age 63 at the present time. For 35 years prior to Hurricane Katrina, I was an admiralty and maritime lawyer with the law firm of Lenley and Kelleher. Part of the story that I have to tell today deals with my relationship with my firm, former firm, and how that relationship wound up on the rocks. What I'm going to tell you is a story of horrible injustice. It's an unbelievable story, and I think you're going to find it very interesting.
As the following story unfolds, certain key dates should be kept in mind. It all began on August 29, 2005, when Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans. On September 9th, widespread media coverage, particularly on CNN, was given to O'Dwyer's criticism of governmental actions following the storm. On September 11th, a pivotal meeting in which O'Dwyer was a topic of conversation took place in Attorney General Charles Fody's office in Baton Rouge. On September 17th, O'Dwyer was visited by a number of unexpected guests that included a federal judge and law enforcement agents. On September 19th, O'Dwyer filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of victims of the storm. On September 20th, O'Dwyer was abducted from his home and imprisoned in the temporary jail set up at New Orleans Union Passenger Terminal, referred to as Camp Amtrak. Some of the subsequent events are included in the video that follows. Ashton, we understand that your life has been considerably altered by events that took place in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that many people were involved in what happened. Help us to understand from your perspective what was happening before you were arrested at your property.
The answer to your question is a multifaceted one, and we have to go back in time from the date of the hit, which was September 20 of 2005, to 10 days or so prior to the 20th. I was giving interviews to videographers who would stop here at 6034 St. Charles Avenue. We were the main thoroughfare in and out of the city of New Orleans. The rest of the city had flooded, okay? And I was appalled by all levels of government, federal, state, and local, who failed the citizenry miserably and who allowed the city to flood, and then who failed to dewater the city, failed to rescue the people in a timely fashion at the convention center, the Superdome, on rooftops, on elevated expressways, and elsewhere. And I let my frustrations with government at all levels hang out. And then, at some point in time, we were threatened with mandatory evacuation from our homes. There was no reason for me to evacuate. My property was high and dry. I had provisions sufficient to supply a small army. I had weapons, so if there was any threat of danger, I was in a position to protect myself, my property, and anybody who needed protection. So I got on the news through videos. I knew government was incapable of protecting my property, just like they were incapable of evacuating those at the convention center and at the Superdome. I was going to trust government to protect my property?
Aside from those residents who were unable to leave, there were a number of New Orleanians with homes located on high ground who chose to remain in the city to protect their property. in defiance of Mayor Ray Nagin's mandatory order to evacuate. Two of those refusing to leave were attorneys Ashton O'Dwyer and Leroy Hartley. However, their treatment was very different. Hartley actually fired his rifle into a crowd of looters, but he had been an associate of Sheriff Charles C. Fody Jr. before Fody became Attorney General, and instead of being disciplined, a police helicopter was dispatched to chase the looters. In comparison, O'Dwyer was abducted, brutalized, tortured, and falsely imprisoned because he openly criticized all levels of government for their poor response to Hurricane Katrina, and because his constitutionally protected speech was carried on national television. He was a political target. Members of the television and print media took an unusual interest in O'Dwyer's defiance, and the exposure he received proved to be significant in the impending turn of events. O'Dwyer's emotional and animated remarks had been broadcast on CNN on September 9, 2005. He had exercised his First Amendment right to express his opinions to the media and had exercised his Second Amendment right to bear arms to protect his property. When Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans on August 29, 2005, many institutions were forced to evacuate. This included the state and federal court systems, which relocated to Louisiana's capital, Baton Rouge.
But let me talk about the things that I learned after the fact. First of all, I learned that on September the 11th, 2005, this was a Sunday morning in Baton Rouge, in Fody's office, a meeting is held, and the attendees at the meeting were the now Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Catherine D. Kimball, who had been appointed by the then Chief Justice with broad powers to act in an emergency. She was temporarily based in Baton Rouge in the offices of the then Attorney General, Charles C. Fody Jr. He is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. Kimball had Fody's ear. Kimball also had with her Charles B. Platzmeyer Jr., who is Kimball's chief disciplinary counsel. He has broad authority over lawyers like me, okay? And he thought that he, with Kimball's blessing, because he works for Kimball, would intimidate me into silence by having my law partners inform me that if I didn't stop giving interviews, lay down my weapons and surrender them to lawful authority and abandon my property, that I was going to be suspended from the practice of law and that the firm would terminate my partnership.
The president of the Louisiana Bar Association, Frank Nooner, was also there. It wasn't long after Platzmeyer laid down the conditions for O'Dwyer to retain his present status that Charles R. Talley, a fellow partner at Lemley & Kelleher, communicated a similar message.
He made it his business personally during the prior week to call me on a number of occasions and tell me, if you don't stop giving interviews, if you don't lay down your weapons, if you don't abandon your house, your partnership can be terminated without prior notice to you. And he also told me, which was a lie, that I'd been suspended from the practice of law by Platzmeyer. There are Platzmeyer's fingers in this pie. And one of the other partners who wrote me a letter on the Thursday, that would have been the 14th, open copy Platzmeyer on the letter telling me, your partnership will be terminated without further notice if you don't stop giving interviews, lay down your weapons, or vacate your house. The first thing I learned after learning about this meeting was that at the meeting, Kimball says, in the presence of Platzmeyer, Nooner, and Foti, quote, "Somebody's got to shut that guy up. He's giving us all a bad name," close quote, referring to me.
Frank X. Nooner Jr. later repeated those words at a Houston Marine Insurance seminar in late September 2005 to an informal group that included one of O'Dwyer's colleagues, James Jimmy Roussel, who subsequently relayed this information to O'Dwyer. Later, in a December 2005 telephone conversation with O'Dwyer, Nooner confirmed that Kimball had spoken those words at that September 11th meeting in Baton Rouge. And it wasn't until March 24, 2008, that Nooner revealed that Attorney General Charles Foti was also at that meeting, an important fact that O'Dwyer immediately shared with Roussel.
Now, I don't think it takes a leap of faith for one to conclude that if the acting Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Kimball, who is now, in fact, the Chief Justice, said to Mr. Foti, in the presence of her Chief Disciplinary Counsel, "Somebody's got to shut that guy up. He's giving us all a bad name," that people are going to jump and things are going to start happening. The state police, who employed the goon squad that came to get me at 5 minutes after midnight on September 20, 2005, worked for Foti.
At the Baton Rouge meeting on September 11th, Kimball's Chief Disciplinary Counsel, Charles Platzmeyer, responded with words to the effect that, "I know some of O'Dwyer's law partners. I'll contact them to learn more about him." Those remarks set into motion a series of events that led to O'Dwyer's estrangement from his law firm. What took place at that meeting culminated with O'Dwyer's abduction, brutalization, torture, and false imprisonment by state law enforcement officers, all acting under color of law without any written order or arrest warrant.
Platzmeyer had control over me as a lawyer, and he had influence with my law partners, one of whom is an individual named Joseph Larry Shea, who used to serve with Platzmeyer on the disciplinary board. These two were joined at the hip.
Shea had not only served as chairman of the Attorney Disciplinary Board, but he was also closely aligned with Frank Nooner, having served with distinction on a number of the Louisiana State Bar Association's committees. Shea was also one of several Lemley and Kelleher partners who had influence with Platzmeyer. On Wednesday, September 14, 2005, 3 days after the Baton Rouge meeting, Charles Talley informed O'Dwyer that he had been suspended from the practice of law by Platzmeyer, and that the suspension would be lifted if he were to stop speaking to the media, surrender his personal firearms, and vacate his property. The next day, September 15th, another Lemley and Kelleher partner, William R. Forrester, hand-delivered the letter from Lemley and Kelleher's Executive Committee Chairman, Ernest L. Edwards, warning O'Dwyer that his partnership at the law firm was at risk if he did not meet those demands, which were required by Platzmeyer. The following day, Friday, September 16, 2005, O'Dwyer dictated his resignation from Lemley and Kelleher to his law firm partner, Charles Talley, via telephone, who was supposed to inform his other partners. But despite his resignation, O'Dwyer was formally voted out of his partnership with Lemley and Kelleher on September 23rd, which was 3 days after he had been abducted, brutalized, tortured, and falsely imprisoned by the state police, and 4 days after he had filed his Katrina lawsuit on September 19, 2005. The extent to which this lawsuit and other factors contributed to O'Dwyer's adversities which include abduction and imprisonment at Camp Amtrak, suspension and disbarment from the practice of law, bankruptcy, malicious prosecution, dismissal of most lawsuits, and failure of authorities to recognize violations of his civil rights, will be explored in subsequent videos in this series.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in